Hi, welcome to Auto Nondescript Geographical Area. It doesn't say all that on your patch there. Well, we couldn't fit all that on the badge. But anyway, what can I do for you? No, I got a check engine light. I need it scanned. So can you help me out with that? Oh, okay, no problem. Let me grab the code reader and we'll check it out. All right, let's see here. See what kind of codes you got. What parts we could sell you. I'm sorry, what was that? But nothing. Let's just get this plugged in here. All right. Well, that's not good. Says right here, got an oxygen sensor code. Really? You could tell that from that little thing? You need an oxygen sensor. Well, I mean we could try and get one. Only do or do not. There is no try. Okay, all right. Let's see if we can find you an oxygen sensor. Let's see. That two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive? Uh-huh. Was that built on a Thursday or a Saturday morning? I'm going to guess a Saturday? Maybe? I don't know. Canadians are different. Before or after lunch? Well, I don't know when they ate lunch, man. I just need the parts. Here we go. We got several products for you. We got a let's see. All right, we got one with 1 year warranty for $67.95 plus tax, and then we have one. This one's really good. I recommend this one. This has got the best warranty. A year and 6 months, and that is $37,453. Would we have that one in stock? We'd have to order the other one. Well, I guess I'd want the good one. I don't want to spend money just putting one of the cheap ones in it for it to fail again. Yeah, sure thing. I'll get that pulled for you right now. Yeah, I got the guy in the back just getting it now. Oh, yeah. You sure you don't need 3 of them? Yeah, we got him. Actually, maybe I'll hold off on it. There's this guy on YouTube that talks about this stuff, but thanks for your help. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of T.N.T. Garage and Performance. And today, if you couldn't figure it out by the intro, we're talking about check engine lights in your vehicle. What do they mean? What are they for? and how to get rid of it. Now, the reason why I'm doing a video on this is actually my son contacted me a few days ago talking about check engine light in his car and asking me for some advice, and I realized that a lot of people are in the same boat when it comes to diagnosing, or more appropriately, misdiagnosing a check engine light. So I'm going to cut this video up into several sections, from basically a beginner level to a mechanic level, for everyone out there to pick a path and save themselves a little money while getting your vehicle fixed. Now, step one, this is for everybody, is understanding why you have a check engine light and what it's for. You're probably thinking, well, why should I listen to you? Well, simple answer, because I've got a shirt with my name on it. Actually, I had spent 10 years, the first 10 years of my professional career and my adult life, of being an automotive technician. Everything starting from the bottom as a lube tech and working my way up into the either senior or master technician at any of the places I've worked, which includes full diagnostics, engine rebuilds, and everything involved with that. So I've got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge behind this, and generally all that stuff leads to my own intuition that'll help me get through something quicker. So I want to pass some of that along to you. All right, well, no matter what your skill level is when it comes to automobiles, whether it be absolutely nothing to knowing everything, the most important part to understand is just the basics. Why is a check engine light? What is a check engine light? So I'm going to walk you through it, and this part is for everybody, and I'll try to break it down so it's easily understandable. Now, most vehicles from, I'd say American anyway, from 86, 87 on, have fuel injection, which means no carburetor, nothing like that. You just put the gas in the car, you go. You don't worry about pumping the throttle, none of that stuff. And what that means when you have fuel injection, at least modern fuel injection, is you have a computer in your car that controls your fuel injection, and that is called the E.C.M, or Engine Control Module. So what that does is it takes a bunch of data from sensors that are all around the engine, in the exhaust, on the throttle body, stuff like that, takes all that information and bleeds it down and sends out signals to your engine on how much fuel it needs or how much timing it needs as far as your ignition goes. The key part of all that is just controlling the engine, and also to keep it in a window. So think of your engine operating the way it runs as a window. You only have so much room that engine can run in and be okay due to emissions, and that is what the check engine light is for. It's only for emissions, the amount of CO2 and other gases that come out of your exhaust. That's all that's worried about. It's a check engine light will not come on because of a mechanical failure. It only comes on when the things that the engine is trying to do doesn't fit in that window to keep it emissions compliant. That's the only reason your check engine light comes on. Now, we're gonna kind of bump it up. Hopefully everyone can keep up. It should be fairly simple. You have inputs and outputs. Your E.C.M is the brain of your engine. And what that does is it takes data from oxygen sensors, your throttle position sensor, or TPS, which how open you have the throttle, how far your foot is on the pedal. You have MAF or MAP sensors, or early GMs that have both, that are either mass airflow, how much air is coming into your engine, or manifold absolute pressure, which is the pressure differential from when your throttle blades are closed, when your throttle's completely off, which creates a vacuum sucking on it, or when they're open and there's no vacuum. That is your pressure inside the engine. And then also cam and or crank sensor, or both, depending on how new your vehicle is. So all those things the E.C.M reads, and it goes, okay, We're reading everything here. We need to adjust how much fuel it's getting. We need to adjust how much timing it gets. And if you have a newer vehicle that does not have a throttle cable, it adjusts your throttle through what the throttle position sensor sees. So all that, when it's working in harmony, there's no check engine light. However, if your oxygen sensor is reading a value that's outside of the window of acceptability, and the computer cannot add or take away enough fuel to get that back in its window, your check engine light is going to come on because your engine is not complying with the emissions set for it inside the computer. Same thing goes with your throttle position sensor. If that is reading something the computer's not happy with and it can't adjust these three things to correct for it, your check engine light is going to come on. So that is the basic understanding of what a check engine light is and why it is. So, very bottom, step one, for the everyday person that just puts gas in their car, drives it, and doesn't care about anything beyond that other than you don't want that light on your dash. So, a lot of people take it to an auto parts store, and I'm not going to call out any auto parts store in particular. I'm just saying, you go to an auto parts store, you tell them, hey, I've got a check engine light on my dash, and they will go, okay, and they will come out with their code reader. It's not a scanner, it's a code reader. They bring their code reader, they plug it into your car, it does computer things, and it brings up a code, which is what's at fault, what your computer is saying is affected. So that code comes up, and two of the most common ones are an evap code, which I'll put the most common on the screen, and oxygen sensor codes, which I will also put on the screen for you. Those two things, and evap is emission stuff. That's not about making the engine run, that's just vapor control basically. So 9 times out of 10, your fuel cap's loose. But the other most common one and the most expensive one is an oxygen sensor. So when you get your car plugged in and they tell you the code, oh, it says your oxygen sensor's bad, that's where you need to stop, right there. What a code tells someone is the system affected. It cannot tell you that that part is failed. There's no way for a computer to straight out say, yep, it's tested, it's bad. That's not it. What a code means is your oxygen sensor is outside the window of values and your computer cannot bring it back in. That can lead to several issues and lots of things that can cause that. We'll get into that in step 2. But for the regular person, you have a code read and it's oxygen sensor, and they go, you need an oxygen sensor. No, do not under any circumstances ever take the word of just a code on a code reader at a parts store. You need to get it properly diagnosed by a professional. And what that means is if you're not comfortable diagnosing it yourself or even getting into the weeds of it, you just want to take it to a shop, you want to get it back, and you want that light gone, you need to go to a reputable shop. And what I mean by that is someone with the proper equipment to diagnose and fix your issue. And what they will do, if they're a good mechanic or technician, they're going to take their time. They're going to look at their own scanner, which can tell them data on what's going on with an affected system, make a judgment there, do some testing, and then come to a conclusion on what your vehicle needs to get rid of the check engine light. So once that happens, you have your car at the shop, they go in, they do their diagnosis, they come out and they tell you, all right, we looked at it, it needs this. Now, it's on you at this point, whether you're going to spend money wisely or waste it. And what I mean by that is when anyone at a shop, whether it be the service writer, the service manager, or the technician himself, if they tell you, we looked at it, it needs this part, you need to ask why they think that it needs that part. Now, any good technician worth his weight in gold is going to give you a step-by-step process of what he went through. He's going to go, I hooked the scanner up to it, I read this, I tested this, I did this. And you might not understand everything he told you, but the fact is what you're looking for is them to give you the step-to-step-to-step hypothesis on why they wound up at that conclusion. And that's most likely the correct answer that they have. But if you ask, why does it need to be replaced? And they go, well, because we looked at it and it's bad. Go to a different shop, save yourself some money. Hi, future me, currently editing the video, realized I forgot to mention this quick part. When it comes to your check engine light, if it's on, or, well, even worse, if it starts flashing, that means you have a bad misfire that your computer cannot compensate for. And when it's flashing and your engine's misfiring and shaking, you need to get it looked at right away, because it can cause critical engine damage through detonation and really hurt the internals of your engine. That's typically caused by a bad spark plug, a bad wire, a bad coil, a severe vacuum leak, loss of compression on a cylinder, stuff like that. So if that happens and your light's flashing, don't drive it, or at least drive it to the nearest shop to have it checked out or look for anything obvious. And back to the video. So that is very much level one of what you should do when you get a check engine light, because you don't want to spend a pile of money, especially right now where the cost of living has gotten so high. There's no reason to just throw money at any problem. It'd be like going into the doctor and going, God, my fingers hurt, I need a heart transplant, get me on the table. The doctor's gonna go, well, some doctors are gonna go, let's have a look at it first. So there you go, there's your introduction and step one into diagnosing your check engine light. So we're gonna take a quick break and we're gonna move on to step two, and that is visually diagnosing any system, say if you don't have a scanner but you got a little wit about you. So we're going to move on to that in a second. Well, all right, it's time to move on to level two, and this is for the people who understand how their vehicle works and have some wrenching knowledge, at least as far as taking things apart, putting them back together, visually inspecting things. So when your check engine light on it, you can kind of work your way through it and maybe find the issue and come up with a solution. So sticking with the most common, part bought in a parts store because of what a code reader tells you, we're going to go with the example of the oxygen sensor. And this is where we're going to get a little more technical. So your oxygen sensor has readings as your engine's running. It's not measuring the oxygen in your exhaust, it is measuring the fuel in your exhaust, or at least the burnt fuel. So you have an O2 sensor code pop up. It'll either say rich or lean or bad circuit or O2 circuit heater. A lot of times it's rich or lean. And what that means is rich is you have too much fuel, lean is too little fuel. And why that's coming up is your oxygen sensor is somehow getting a reading out of its limit, or it's staying at one end of the spectrum or the other. It's supposed to cycle back and forth. So if it sticks to one end or the other, or is getting a reading outside of its limits, you have an issue with fuel. Clearly, you're not getting enough burnt or you're getting too little burnt. That can be caused by several things, and this is where the visual and or kind of mechanical aspect comes in. Say I've got my 2000 Dodge Ram. It starts throwing an O2 sensor code for lean or rich. It can go either way. And 9 times out of 10 on a V8 Dodge with the Magnum 5.2 or the 5.9, it's going to be a plenum gasket, which is allowing air to come into the engine that is not controlled by the E.C.M. So anytime you have the addition of air that the IAC didn't let in or the throttle didn't let in, your computer most likely is not going to be able to compensate and add enough fuel for that incoming air, thus throwing an O2 sensor code saying that it's running lean. So that means that there's an actual failure within a part that you need to correct. Another thing that can happen is your exhaust can actually cause an O2 sensor code to pop up. Say you're driving your vehicle and you hear tick, 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 like an exhaust leak. That exhaust leak can actually cause air to be introduced into the system ahead of the oxygen sensor and give it a false reading. So you want to make sure that if you have an exhaust leak and you're throwing an engine light and it's an O2 sensor code, fix that exhaust leak, clear your codes, and I bet it goes away. So, getting into everything else you can diagnose yourself without any, special tools, scanners, stuff like that. First thing you can look at is your tune-up. A lot of times, if you have been running spark plugs for 200,000 miles, they're not burning the fuel efficiently enough in order for all your sensors to read it and say, this is good with emissions, we're going to leave the check engine light off. Sometimes you could just change your plugs, do a tune-up, and it fixes your issue. And before you spend the money, pull a plug out, inspect it, inspect stuff. Don't just throw parts at a problem. Visually inspect whatever you think might be causing something to read off and throw a code. Just because someone else said they had that issue doesn't mean it's the issue you're having. You could also have a dirty fuel system that's not allowing enough fuel in to comply with what the computer wants. So, your injectors could have some gunk in them. You could change your fuel filter. Your fuel pump could be weak. And it might run fine, but once you get to the higher limits that the computer wants to keep adding fuel, the pressure's not there to deliver it. So as far as level 2, just basic tools, no specialty equipment, and just diagnosing it. Just visually look at stuff once you know what your code is. Look at the wiring, make sure it's not chafed. Look for any obvious things. Vacuum hoses on your engine that are cracked, the boots that go on them, if they're cracked, stuff like that. You can also, while your engine's running, spray carb cleaner around the intake, the throttle body. If it revs up, of course, you got a vacuum leak, and that will affect the whole system. Your throttle position sensor really has little to do with emissions unless it's demanding it, saying it's open when it's not. You're delivering too much fuel, and you get a rich O2 sensor code. Another thing, if you're having issues, check engine light or general drivability. Mass airflow sensor, that's a big one, especially on late 90s GM stuff and for a period in the mid 80s. And later GM stuff as well. If your mass airflow is dirty, the engine won't run right at all because it's not able to tell how much air it's getting, so it'll either pull fuel back because it thinks it's not getting the air, and you won't have the performance you need, and everything will be out of whack. Clean it. Just don't replace it. Clean it first. They make an actual mass airflow sensor cleaner that you can use and bring it right back around. Where it gets a little more in the weeds is MAP sensor, manifold absolute pressure. And that is going to be something that you either need to have some knowledge of how a multimeter works or have access to a scanner to diagnose that. And I have seen them go bad. And that really will affect your drivability and or throw a check engine light. Your cam and crank sensor, well, pretty self-explanatory what they're for. Your crank sensor is the location of your crankshaft, which, helps control your timing, your fuel delivery. Same with the cam sensor. Some vehicles have one, some have both. It's just depending on your make and model, what year they are. Everything now has both. They have cam and crank sensors. So those are more common of just a straight out failure, especially like older Dodges. Their crank sensors, if you've had one, you've had to replace them. So this isn't so much of an issue that's going to cause your check engine light to come on. It's just going to quit running. Or if the cam sensors start to go bad, it'll act really weird and be barely drivable. So that brings us down to your idle air control. And this will cause all kinds of problems. If it's stuck in the open position while you're trying to drive it, obviously you're going to throw a code for being too lean. So a lot of times you can take the idle air control solenoid off of your throttle body or intake in some vehicles and clean it, and that's all it needs, and then it'll get right back to what it's supposed to do. And then of course your timing and fuel, if you didn't monkey with stuff, like if you have a distributor ignition vehicle and you haven't monkeyed with that, if you throw some sort of code like that and they boil it down to timing, it could be a faulty cam sensor, something like that. That's getting a little more into the weeds for level 2, but timing you shouldn't really have to worry about, especially on the newer coil on plug or just coil ignition systems. Fuel, of course, you'll notice that right away if you're having issues. So you'll have a lack of power, it won't want to start. That's a pretty easy one to diagnose. And of course, anyone can get a fuel pressure sensor to determine if your pump is providing the pressure it should be. So now that we got all that explained, I will actually take you out under the hood of my truck and kind of point out a couple of these things and hopefully help you along the way. All right, now we're under hood of my personal 2000 Dodge Ram 1500 with a 5.9 liter Magnum V8 in it. Very simple engine, really common across the board on how it operates with other modern engines of this era. So I'm going to remove the air box and kind of get this out of our way so we can see what we're dealing with and point out some things to you to look for. So some things that will affect your drivability, check engine light, stuff like that. Of course, look at your vacuum hoses. A lot of these are a plastic that gets brittle over time and will crack. Your boots will get brittle over time and crack. Also, I was talking about the MAP sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor. This can cause some issues. They're, I wouldn't say more robust than a mass airflow, but they definitely have less issues of getting contaminated and causing other issues. But on most vehicles, it's either right on the throttle body or in the intake manifold itself. Your throttle position sensor is always on the throttle body in any cable actuated throttle body. The electronic ones, it's the pedal and the throttle body, both. Of course, more vacuum lines on a distributor ignition vehicle. Of course, you got the distributor. Usually don't have to monkey with that unless you're doing a tune-up, which can also cause issues for drivability if your tune-up is bad, your plugs are bad, or your wires are in poor shape and arcing or just not getting any continuity. Also, check your fuel injector connectors. They're always going to be going into the intake. Make sure the wiring's good. And of course, down in the exhaust, you can see the oxygen sensor poking out there. And of course, before you spend the money on replacing one, you want to check the wiring. So go under the vehicle, make sure it's properly connected, the connector's not corroded, and none of your wires are chafed or anything like that. But you can see what I was talking about, how your oxygen sensor is downstream, and right there is where the exhaust connects with the engine to your manifolds. If that connection is leaking exhaust out, it's also pulling air in because of the Venturi effect. As air passes a gap, it's going to pull air in with it. So that'll introduce fresh air to your oxygen sensor, and that will tell the computer it's not getting enough fuel. Your computer won't be able to add enough fuel to compensate. Boom, you'll throw a check engine light for an oxygen sensor. Same thing is if the gasket or O-ring under your throttle body is leaking and pulling air in, or if you have a manifold leak, like intake manifold sucking air in, or commonly on these Dodges, this stupid sheet metal plate that's bolted to the bottom of it will pull air in, all of which will cause an issue. And you really don't need a scanner to look at it to figure out what's wrong. A lot of this stuff you can see visually, or you can hear it, or if it's idling funny, you've got a vacuum leak. So Those are things to check under the hood if you don't have a scanner and figure out what's going on. Also, too, on a mass airflow system, which this truck does not have, is in the tube before you get to the throttle body, there will be a mass airflow sensor in the tube somewhere. Now, I've seen this on many import cars where they have a real soft rubber boot instead of this hard plastic one. And over time, them flexing, they'll crack and they'll start pulling air in on the engine side of the tube before the mass airflow sensor out here or after it. So drawing cold air in, mass airflow off to the throttle body. If it's pulling air between here and the throttle body, your mass airflow won't be reading it, and your computer is going to have a fit. So make sure all your ducting and tubes from the mass airflow to your engine are completely sealed. It's not pulling any air and it doesn't have any cracks. And as well, may as well clean your mass airflow sensor while you're at it, and that should alleviate most of your issues. Addressing the second most, or probably first most common code on any vehicle is an EVAP code, which I'll put the typical code on the screen because I don't remember that kind of stuff off the top of my head. But if you scan your vehicle, it comes up with an EVAP code. This is part of your EVAP system. These lines are basically vapor lines that go back to your fuel tank, and on this particular truck, the canister and everything is back there, the charcoal canister to help filter it, and this just draws engine vacuum to circulate it and burn it off. So most of the time, this solenoid ain't going to be your issue, probably a loose fuel cap. But again, if it's not your fuel cap, look at these lines. Just like a vacuum line, they can get brittle and break. And the one time that these actually really go bad is it's super common on 99 to 2004 Grand Cherokees, WJs. They've got a EVAP solenoid in the back behind the rear bumper on the driver's side that gets all plugged up, has issues, and then your solenoid under the hood goes crazy and it throws a check engine light because it's drawing fresh air into it instead of the closed system. So that's something to look for on your EVAP system. Of course, check your fuel cap and then check the hoses, stuff like that, unless you drive a Grand Cherokee, which if you do with a V8, you probably hate your life. So that's all that stuff under here as far as mechanically diagnosing something and getting to the root cause. So now it's time to move on to level 3. Well, if you made it this far, it's time to get to level 3. And this is where it gets a lot more in depth and I get a little more pedantic about it. But we're going to go back. I know I've been talking a lot about oxygen sensors in this episode, but it's really the most common part replaced because of a code that says it's bad. And like I said before in the very beginning, the code does not mean that part failed. That is just, think of it this way. You get a code. That is your destination on a GPS. You got to figure out how to get there somehow. You can't just teleport from where you are to your destination. You have to figure out how to get there. And as far as the GPS in the situation, this is where a scan tool comes in. Now this is an archaic model, but a very reliable and a very good scanner. These were state-of-the-art back when they came out, and it still works great for most of the vehicles I have, and we'll get into those systems here in a second. Now, back to the O2 sensors, because we're going to beat this dead horse until everyone gets it. There's several systems over time that have controlled your E.C.M. The first one was very, 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 very simple, and that was GM closed something, whatever. I'll put it on the screen. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but everyone remembers the CCC vehicles. They were carb rated and they had an oxygen sensor. So the carb just did whatever a carb does, and the oxygen sensor went yep or no. So you remember those because it was like a softball sized light that would blind you when it came on. So that was the very earliest like check engine light. After that, once we started going to fuel injection or the god-awful electronic feedback carbs that GM and Chrysler love so much, and Ford, we're going to go into OBD1. That's Onboard Diagnostics 1. And what that was, it was every manufacturer had their own like plug-in and system and all that stuff to be able to read your E.C.M. And the nice thing about them is most of them you could pull codes by jumping 2 wires in your OBD1 port and just counting how many times the check engine light flashes to get your codes. Same thing, doesn't tell you what's wrong, just gives you a destination. Why is it wrong? Once 95 rolled around, OBD2 was starting to bleed into vehicles. 96 was the first real year of everyone across the board going OBD2, and that included a common connector, a diagnostic port for all of them, so you only needed one plug-in, and that also included more sensors, more controllability of your engine. So one of the big things OBD1 had was only one oxygen sensor, typically just one right off the manifold or in the Y pipe, and that was it. You just had that. It read your fuel air mixture, and that's all it did. Anything OBD2 is going to have at least 2 oxygen sensors. You're going to have sensor 1 and sensor 2. Sensor 1 is upstream, which means close to the engine, before your catalytic converter. That measures your fuel trim, your air-fuel ratio. Sensor 2 is your catalyst efficiency. All sensor 2 is for is to sit behind the catalytic converter and measure whether or not it's doing its job. Sensor 2, if you ever see a code that says bank 1, sensor 1, or bank 2, sensor 1, that's fuel trim. Anything, and I mean anything, that says sensor 2 or S2 does not control fuel trim. Let's say that together. Sensor 2 does not control fuel trim. All right, that's great. Good job. All sensor 2 is catalyst efficiency, and no way does that affect the fuel economy or the way your vehicle runs. Period. But what about... Yep, even then too. Don't even think about it. So, now that I got that rant out of the way, all these things are much more accessible in OBD2, and that's where this guy comes in. And this is also compatible with OBD1 with the correct adapters. So, this snap-on scanner, affectionately known as the brick, we're going to take into the RAM and kind of show you the ins and outs of it and how to help yourself diagnose an issue. So, let's jump into the truck, plug this bad boy in. All right, we are inside my RAM, and we will show you a couple things that a scan tool is capable of and how to go about it. So the first thing you want to do, regardless of what style connector you have, should be this style for OBD2. Snap-ons are a little different. They have these little keys, whatever. So yeah, locate your OBD2 port, which is right there. Plug it in. And, of course, turn your ignition on. And you can see check engine light came on when the key cycled. Our computer's working. And let's dig into... All right. Try and get this so you guys can see it the best. So, we're just going to do generic on this because I only have the cards for up to 98. This is a 2000. So... we're going to go codes and data menu. And of course, on a scanner like this, you could read the codes, key on. And it should not have any codes in this truck. Yep, no codes, but you could read them if they were here, and they will tell you what you got going on. So we're going to go to data and codes. And this, when you're diagnosing anything, as far as the code that you have, you can look at all of the data and see what's going on. So, We have, of course, your regular data, RPM, try to get less glare, throttle position, which when I push the pedal should change. There it goes. This scanner is a little sluggish, so it's not as real time as I want it to be. But if you're having a TPS issue, if that's jumping around or not resting at a low value like this, you could pretty much figure out that your TPS is bad. And of course, you want to check the circuits to make sure. So we got intake air temp, coolant temp. There's our map sensor in kilopascals, ignition advance, and these are your oxygen sensor. This bank 1, which this truck only has one upstream sensor. There's not one on each bank, so if you only have one, it's always bank 1. You got short-term fuel trim and long-term fuel trim, and that has to do with if you're open or closed loop. Open loop will run off of short term, so whatever it's doing right now, it'll adjust it very rapidly. Long term will make lesser adjustments, not quite as wide. So again, there's our voltage to our O2 sensor up to a volt. There's the regular trim, sensor 2. This would be your catalyst efficiency. Vehicle speed, engine load, and the check engine light or malfunction indicator lamp, if you want to be fancy, is off. So we're going to start the truck and we're going to see what our sensors are doing. So you see our timing was advanced, and now it's coming down, then it's idling. And we should be bringing up fuel trim here shortly. Our manifold absolute pressure. Intake air temp, coolant temp. And we're starting to get O2 sensor readings moving around. And this should be cycling up and down. So there we go. So when you're diagnosing an oxygen sensor, God, it's really hard to keep the glare out. An oxygen sensor, you want to be watching these values. Your bank 1, mainly your sensor 1 oxygen sensors. You see how it's going up in value and down in value. It's not hanging out in the middle, but it is moving from the lowest value to the highest value, which is a good thing. If it's sticking up close to a volt or almost down to nothing, you are having either a vacuum leak, air introduced to the system, you've got a faulty injector, something like that. And you can see that it's alternating as well as it does that between pulling fuel and adding fuel. That negative value is pulling fuel and it's adding fuel. It's cycling back and forth because we're in an open loop fuel trim, short-term fuel trim. Our ignition has been advanced. Our manifold pressure is reading as it should. There we go. Now fuel system is in closed loop, which we can go back and look at our fuel trim, which right now it hasn't got enough data to give us a long-term fuel trim table, but it is still operating as it should. And you can also read the percentage on what it's calling for and a voltage. So that's one thing to look for when you're diagnosing check engine light, oxygen sensor, stuff like that. If this isn't moving around, check your circuits, check for leaks, make sure you're getting the proper amount of fuel, whether it be the fuel pump that's weak, or you got a leaky injector, or an injector that's not spraying fuel like it should. But this will walk you through live data to tell you what's going on. Now, to illustrate my point on the whole sensor 2 does not affect fuel trim, right there, trim, bank 1, sensor 2, Not available because it's not a thing. That's just what they put in there. Sensor 2 does nothing. That is catalyst efficiency. So, of course, we're not moving. Engine load is almost nothing. All my systems are ready. So, that's kind of walking through all of your information on your scanner, and this will allow you to see everything. Even if you've got like a vehicle speed sensor that's messed up, you can read your vehicle speed, make sure it jives with everything. RPM, like if you have a crank sensor issue, I've had this happen on a Neon where the crank sensor would get hot and quit working, and you go to crank it. Even when you're cranking, this should show some RPM, so 200, 300 RPM as you're cranking it. If that's 0 during cranking, your crank sensor is not reading, bad wire, something like that. You don't have to just throw parts at stuff if you have a scanner handy. Now, if I had the 2000, year 2000 stuff, I could go in and do tests of many systems, evap system, test the solenoid, stuff like that. Newer vehicles, you can test the injectors, and you could shut off certain cylinders on newer vehicles with a newer scanner to kind of chase a misfire. So that's a little bit about getting into the scanner and seeing what's going on. Well, and that brings us to the end, the conclusion of the video, and that is, when your check engine light comes on, don't just throw money at it. That's one thing that, as a veteran automotive technician, it always just drove me nuts. We used to have guys at certain shops that we call RevTune that would just bring the car in, run it on the limiter, and go, you need this, which was typically all the valves because they kiss the pistons. But they'd throw a bunch of sensors at it and wonder why it needed a head. Just don't throw parts at your stuff. There's a lot of different mechanics out there. There's guys that are very, very good at replacing parts, and I'm not going to take anything away from them. But there's also guys that, or yourselves, that could look at a problem and diagnose it with a little bit of common sense and a little bit of patience, instead of just going, one of these is bad, I need to throw it at it. And that's where a scanner really comes in. You can pick these up for pretty cheap and do most of your mid-aughts or late 90s vehicles and read them. Of course, you can get into like the newer launch scanners. They're getting to be more and more affordable, that can get into like the CAN bus systems on the newer vehicles and also help you diagnose stuff from there. But just remember, when you're pulling a check engine light for codes, whatever it tells you the code is, no matter what it is, it doesn't mean that that particular component in that system is bad. You need to figure out why it's saying that. So just don't spend money if you don't have to. And, maybe you could save up a little, get a scanner and diagnose your own stuff. And also a good thing to have is a multimeter test lead, so you can test circuits to make sure you have proper continuity, there's no breaks in them, you're getting the right voltage, because automotive systems don't just run completely on 12 volts when it comes to E.C.M. It's a lot of 5-volt reference, a single volt reference back and forth in the case of oxygen sensors. The heaters, of course, on those are higher voltage, but typically the only time you'd have to replace an oxygen sensor is if it got contaminated. Usually leaded fuel, like if you run race gas in a fuel injected vehicle, can affect the sensor and cause it to fail, or water intrusion, say from improper mounting to where you're bringing it in at the bottom of the pipe where water will sit, or you're just in a generally moist area. So those are some things that you can do to see where you need to go. You just don't have to throw these parts at it. I imagine parts stores make a fortune selling oxygen sensors that no one needs. Don't just trust what someone tells you. Go ahead, use the most important tool you have, and also, continue to have the ability to learn. Anyone could do this. If I could get to where I was as a technician before the money wasn't any good and start truck driving, then, anyone can. So that pretty much wraps it up for today. I figured I'd throw this in here. We're going to be doing a lot of work on the Checker Gasser project here this coming Saturday, Sunday, getting the floors and everything in it and getting it ready to go. So stay tuned for that. And of course, you can find all the projects right here on YouTube under certain playlists. There's playlists for almost anything. I'll throw one up in the corner. And I think I'm going to start a new series on the hows and the whys of certain things when it comes to vehicles. This is just one that I think is pretty important because a lot of people are just throwing money away for no reason. So if you enjoyed any of this, which I hope you did, thanks for coming along for the ride. Go ahead and find me at T.N.T Garage and Performance on Facebook. Also, T.N.T Garage and Performance on Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every time you watch one of these videos, go ahead and like it. If you haven't already subscribed, which most of my viewers aren't, hit the subscribe button. It's free. And if you hit the little bell, it'll tell you when I'm up here blabbering. So who doesn't enjoy that? Anyway, so if you could do all that, that would be great. Again, thanks for watching. And remember, if it ain't broke, fix it till it is. We'll see you soon.